Nous allons reprendre nos travaux après cette petite interruption. Et donc nous sommes au point 6, échange de vues sur l'évolution récente des droits de l'homme au Liban. Les nouvelles du Liban, comme vous le savez, ne sont pas particulièrement bonnes depuis la terrible explosion du port sur laquelle nous avons d'ailleurs travaillé ici dans notre sous-commission et de manière plus générale au Parlement européen. Les Libanais affrontent une crise multiple, une crise politique, une crise économique, une crise financière, une crise sociale à laquelle s'ajoute la crise sanitaire due au Covid-19. Dans une lettre transmise au Conseil des droits de l'homme de l'ONU, plusieurs ONG libanaises et internationales dénoncent les entraves sérieuses à l'enquête sur l'explosion du port de Beyrouth. Celle-ci semble être au point mort. Les victimes exigent réponse, condamnation et réparation. Les organisations de la société civile dénoncent également une corruption endémique et une impunité générale. Le pouvoir judiciaire est instrumentalisé par une classe politique rejetée par la population libanaise. Cette crise dramatique de la gouvernance affecte les droits sociaux, les droits économiques de la population qui se paupérisent de jour en jour. L'accès à l'alimentation, au logement, aux médicaments, aux soins médicaux, surtout pour les plus démunis et les populations vulnérables, sont aujourd'hui en grande difficulté. Les autorités ont introduit des tickets de rationnement et aussi des tickets de rationnement, des tickets d'accès à la nourriture organisés par le Hezbollah récemment. Nous ne pouvons pas faire abstraction par ailleurs de l'environnement géopolitique conflictuel qui rajoute à l'incertitude et au désespoir aujourd'hui au Liban. Alors cette situation, nous souhaitons l'aborder aujourd'hui, faire le point sur la situation politique mais aussi humanitaire un an après l'explosion du port et voir dans quelle mesure l'Union européenne peut soutenir, au-delà de l'aide financière, un pays ami au bord de l'effondrement. Pour en parler, nous avons 3 experts. Le premier est Karim Emile Bitar, professeur des relations internationales à l'Université Saint-Joseph de Beyrouth, maître de conférences en géopolitique, diplomatie et études du Moyen-Orient à l'École normale supérieure et senior philo à l'Institut des relations internationales et stratégiques de Paris. Nous avons ensuite 2 journalistes d'investigation, Madame Rachel Karam et Monsieur Jad Chosn, qui devraient nous rejoindre. J'espère que nous n'aurons pas de difficultés techniques de connexion. Je vais donner la parole aux représentants du Service européen d'action extérieure pour une éventuelle remarque et observation. Après la prise de parole des députés, ce sera Daniel Artisti qui prendra la parole. Je donne tout de suite la parole aux experts. Karim Emile Bitar, vous avez la parole.
Monsieur Bitar, appuyez sur le bouton Speak, s'il vous plaît.
Oui, je vous remercie, Madame la Présidente. Bonjour à toutes et à tous. C'est avec beaucoup de chagrin et d'angoisse que je m'adresse à vous aujourd'hui. Il y a quelques années, la présidente de la Commission des Affaires étrangères, Madame Michèle Alliot-Marie, m'avait demandé de témoigner sur la tragédie en cours en Syrie et en Irak et sur la conséquence de cette tragédie sur les chrétiens du monde arabe et sur les autres minorités religieuses. J'étais loin de me douter que, quelques années plus tard, mon propre pays, le Liban, allait traverser une crise politique, économique, financière, humanitaire, aussi dramatique que celle qu'ont traversée l'Irak et la Syrie. Selon l'UNICEF, près de 30% d'enfants libanais ont dormi sans avoir dîné hier soir, comme durant les 6 derniers mois. Plus de 55% de la population libanaise vit aujourd'hui en dessous du seuil de pauvreté. Ce seuil de pauvreté a doublé depuis 2019, selon la Banque mondiale et la Commission des Nations unies, la Commission économique et sociale pour l'Asie de l'Ouest, l'ESCOA. L'extrême pauvreté a également triplé. 840 000 personnes vivent sous le taux de pauvreté, dont 12% de foyers dirigés par des femmes. Les projections les plus récentes indiquent que la situation va encore s'aggraver dans les mois qui viennent avec une crise alimentaire, une crise d'accès aux médicaments. Comment en sommes-nous arrivés là? Eh bien, en 2 mots, mesdames et messieurs, le Liban, qui était autrefois une démocratie parlementaire libérale, qui se targuait d'être une démocratie consensuelle et consociative, a vu son système politique entièrement dénaturé. Nous ne sommes plus dans un cadre démocratique. Le pouvoir est aujourd'hui exercé par une oligarchie politico-financière qui regroupe des partis aux tendances idéologiques diverses, certains étant alignés sur l'Iran et la Syrie, d'autres étant plutôt proches des États-Unis et de l'Arabie saoudite, mais tous ont en commun de contribuer à l'appauvrissement massif de ce pays, puisqu'ils forment un seul et même bloc, ils gouvernent ensemble au sein de gouvernements d'union nationale supposément depuis une trentaine d'années, des gouvernements qui ont vite fait de se transformer en gouvernements de paralysie nationale. Un extraordinaire mouvement de protestation est né en octobre 2019. Pour la première fois dans l'histoire du Liban contemporain, près de 2 millions de citoyens du nord au sud, toutes communautés confondues, sont descendus dans les rues pour réclamer la chute de cette oligarchie corrompue, pour réclamer un nouveau pacte social et économique, pour réclamer une évolution vers la citoyenneté et le fait de transcender ce régime fondé sur le communautarisme qui régit aujourd'hui le pays. Malheureusement, ces manifestants ont très vite été brutalement réprimés. La classe politique a fait bloc. Le Hezbollah, qui se présentait naguère comme un mouvement anti-establishment, s'est au contraire précipité cette fois-ci à la défense du régime et de l'establishment et a fait office de force contre-révolutionnaire. Aujourd'hui, ces mêmes partis continuent à se diviser sur le partage des parts et des prébendes. Ils ont délibérément torpillé les négociations avec le Fonds monétaire international, qui était la seule voie qui pourrait permettre au Liban de sortir la tête de l'eau après avoir accumulé une dette estimée à plus de 84 milliards de dollars par le plan de sauvetage économique qui avait été préparé avec l'aide de la banque Lazare. Donc, énormément de citoyens libanais, toutes communautés confondues, estiment aujourd'hui que cette oligarchie politico-financière ne comprend qu'un seul langage. Elle détient tous les rouages du pays, les rouages sécuritaires, économiques. Il y a une relation incestueuse entre les banques et la classe politique. Le Liban a été décrit par plusieurs analystes politiques comme une bancocratie. Et aujourd'hui, de très nombreux citoyens, je pense une majorité de Libanais, toutes communautés confondues, estiment qu'il est temps de changer d'attitude vis-à-vis de cette classe politique. Il est temps que tous ceux qui, sur la scène internationale, se préoccupent des droits de l'homme passent à des mesures, à l'adoption de mesures beaucoup plus fortes, de sanctions ciblées, du gel des avoirs des membres de cette oligarchie politico-financière qui ont réussi, alors que le Liban croulait sous les dettes, à sortir plus de 6 milliards de dollars du pays après la révolution libanaise, alors même qu'ils ont eux-mêmes torpillé l'adoption d'une loi sur le contrôle des capitaux qui aurait dû être la première étape face à une crise d'une telle ampleur. Ces sanctions, à mes yeux, doivent toutefois, pour être crédibles, viser les deux camps de l'échiquier politique libanais, ne pas être dirigée exclusivement contre un camp. Personne au Liban n'a le monopole de la corruption. Aussi bien le camp supposément pro-occidental que le camp aligné sur la Syrie et sur l'Iran partagent les mêmes combines, les mêmes entourloupes qui leur permettent de siphonner l'aide étrangère. Le Liban a reçu plus de 170 milliards de flux financiers entrants dans la décennie qui a suivi les années 90 et 2000. C'est quasiment l'équivalent de tout ce que l'Europe a reçu à l'époque du plan Marshall. Cette aide n'a pas été utilisée pour les réformes sectorielles et structurelles. Cette aide a été détournée. Elle a servi à la classe politique pour maintenir ses réseaux clientélistes. Aujourd'hui, le temps est venu de changer de paradigme, de se montrer beaucoup plus sévère. Un citoyen libanais que je suis, c'est quelque peu difficile de demander à la communauté internationale d'imposer des sanctions. Ça nous met un peu mal à l'aise en tant que souverainistes libanais, mais nous sommes arrivés à un stade où la situation est tellement dramatique que beaucoup d'entre nous estiment que le seul moyen, c'est de faire une pression beaucoup plus intense sur les membres de cette oligarchie corrompue jusqu'à la moelle qui a saigné le Liban. Le Liban n'est pas un pays pauvre, le Liban dispose d'extraordinaires richesses, mais il a été pillé et le temps est venu, mesdames et messieurs, de vous montrer digne de cette institution que vous représentez, des valeurs de l'Union européenne, de maintenir une certaine équidistance entre les États-Unis et ses rivaux, de protéger le Liban de cette guerre des axes régionaux qui l'a extrêmement affaibli, mais cela passe par l'émergence d'une nouvelle classe politique et par la mise en place de nouvelles institutions. Tout cela ne pourra se faire tant que ces 5 ou 6 oligarques qui gouvernent aujourd'hui le pays, ce sont des chefs féodaux, des anciens miliciens, des milliardaires ayant fait fortune dans des conditions douteuses, qui sont en train de socialiser leurs pertes après avoir privatisé les profits. Le temps est venu, mesdames et messieurs, encore une fois, de passer à la vitesse supérieure. Nous n'avons plus le luxe d'attendre. Le Liban risque une dislocation dans les prochaines semaines et les prochains mois, un effondrement de toutes ces structures étatiques, s'il n'y a pas beaucoup plus de pression internationale qui contraindrait cette classe politique à laisser la place à ces dizaines, ces centaines de Libanais qui ont réussi dans tous les domaines, qui sont porteurs de nouveaux projets, de nouvelles politiques économiques et sociales, après une trentaine d'années où les politiques économiques, fiscales et monétaires ont été fondées sur une gigantesque pyramide de Ponzi, comme l'a appelé le président Macron à juste titre, pyramide de Ponzi qui a fini par s'écrouler. Aujourd'hui, il est absolument nécessaire que ce ne soient pas les Libanais les plus défavorisés qui payent le prix de ces malversations commises par le gouverneur de la Banque centrale, par quelques banquiers véreux et par des politiciens mafieux. Il est absolument nécessaire de protéger les Libanais les plus défavorisés et cela passe, à mon avis, par des sanctions extrêmement sévères qui toucheraient les représentants des deux bords de l'échiquier politique, ce qui pourrait éventuellement permettre, à l'occasion des élections parlementaires qui doivent se tenir l'an prochain, à l'opposition réformatrice d'enregistrer une certaine percée et de commencer à jeter les bases d'un Liban nouveau, fondé sur le développement économique, la justice sociale, la citoyenneté, et non plus sur la kleptocratie et le communautarisme. Je vous remercie, Madame la Présidente, et je me tiens prêt à répondre à toutes vos questions.
Merci, Monsieur Bittard, en tout cas pour vos propos directs, sans langue de bois, concernant la situation au Liban. Et je pense qu'on a bien besoin d'avoir une information sans travers. Alors, je donne la parole à Rachel Karam, journaliste d'investigation. Vous avez 8 minutes si Rachel est connectée.
Madame Karam, you have to push the speak button, please. Thank you.
Je peux vous entendre, est-ce que vous m'entendez aussi?
On vous voit et on vous entend, c'est parfait.
Ok, très bien alors. Merci pour votre invitation. I'm going to speak in English, though we can speak also in French. I just want also to salute my colleague Karim. Actually, Karim, he spoke almost everything about the situation in Lebanon, but he missed some points. I would love to share it with you. I will divide my speech into two categories because I'm a senior field reporter. I have my talk show, my social talk show, so I can somehow tell you how people that are living these numbers that Karim was talking about. But we have to remember on August 4th, a massive explosion happened at the port of the city of Beirut, causing at least 204 deaths, 9 that are still remaining missing, and 6,500 injuries, leaving nearly 300,000 people homeless. The damage, sir and Mrs., who was within 20 kilometers of the blast site, and the World Bank estimated the cost of repairs between 3.8 billions to 4.6 billions. This is what we have to add to everything Karim said, the crisis, the economic crisis, and everything happening in Lebanon. The unemployment is skyrocketing. At the United Nations reported that more than 55% of the population lives in poverty, almost double the rate of the last year. On March 7, like 1 year and 3 months, for the first time in the history, the government default on Lebanon's debt of nearly $90 billion. By the end of the year, the Lebanese pound, our pound, had lost more than 80% of its value. Depositors could not withdraw their saving in US dollars, but were only able to withdraw in pounds. At least then 50% of the price of the black market, and inflation rose 133.5%. We are talking this number so you can estimate the situation in Lebanon. I'm not going to talk only politics, but you have to know that the source of corruption is divided in Lebanon. It's not only in one place. The source is, we can divide mainly into 8, 9, 10 places. 1, the real estate. 2, the customs. 3, the ministries and institutions that provide services. The marine and river properties. The law violation and taxes. The tax evasion, the tenders. Among the source of corruption in Lebanon are uncollected taxes, bills and fees, which are owed to the state by citizens and are estimated at about $6 billion. The absence of economic plans and budgeting for 16 years to reorganize the general financial situation in the country for a period of 10 years. So I think this is the part of numbers, and now being a field reporter, a field senior reporter, today I had an episode like 1 hour ago, and we were talking about the personal initiative. Yes, we need help, but Karim knows, and everybody in this conference who knows a bit about the Lebanese people, we know it's very easy for us to go back to life. We're talking about the human rights. Well, in Lebanon, we have to talk about not the human rights only, the rights to live with dignity. This is what you are missing, but you are sure 100% that we can do it, because it's not that much difficult, especially that people, whether in the north, in the south, in the Mount Lebanon, they are all suffering the same. The medication, the gas, even the jobless, as we said before, that we are really in need. Yes, the UAE, the USA, the Arab countries can help, but by the end of the day, this is my own opinion. It's up to us, the people. We're going to the election. This is where I disagree somehow with Karim. Yes, we need help from others, but there is no gifts in politics. There is no gifts from everyone, not even from your side, guy, Mrs. and Mr., and not from anyone in this country. So this is why, yes, the main issue or the main purpose to be able to build again our country is the population of Lebanon, the youth of Lebanon. The election is in 10 months. This is what this is where we are trying to work hard And being a journalist, I'm trying my best to give this clear vision to the people, trying my best to push into some investigative or even corruption to let people know the reality of Lebanon. This is what I have to say. I prefer to answer the answers, but I hope with what Karim said, numbers, what I added for the economic is fair enough or is enough for you to know the situation in Lebanon.
Thank you, Rachel. I give the floor to Jad Gozd. You have 8 minutes.
Thank you, Speaker. I will. My colleagues described the catastrophe in financial, economic, and social and humanitarian terms, so I won't dwell on this subject so much. To just maybe go forward to talk about our days, maybe the solutions that can be proposed concerning the humanitarian crisis we have in Lebanon and endemic corruption. So I wrote down some material just to try to stick up to the 8 minutes that you gave us. So it's no news, the situation that we described maybe in Lebanon, but what's even more cruel than this crisis we are living in is the management of this crisis by the confessional ruling political parties. Not one decision concerning the deficit in the balance of payments, or the devaluation of the Lebanese lira, or the bankrupt central bank and banking sector, or people's deposits in these banks, or the national debt, or the shrinking of our GDP from around $55 billion in about 2019 before the crisis to around $18 billion expected at the end of this year. Not even a capital control law has been passed 2 years after the banks enforced an illegal and discretionary capital control on money, while billions of dollars belonging to people in circles of power were transferred out of the country, multiplying the losses of those still held hostage. 1 year and 10 months since the beginning of the crisis, and 11 months since the huge explosion of the Beirut port, and the golden rule of our civil war inherited political system has not been breached yet, impunity in the name of confessionalism. But the truth is that all that I have described and are mere symptoms to an older original sin that our political system was built on, which is the transformation of the 15-year-old warlords of the confessional militias that massacred each other between 1975 and 1990 to statesmen of the peace era. The price was eroding the government as the center of decision-making and transforming it into a place where they share states' positions, assets, services to be distributed to their constituents in return of political loyalty. That's why electricity shortages that we're living nowadays are not mere product of the crisis, but date back to 1997. And our last train station worked till 1991. Since 1991, we don't have any efficient public transportation sector. The public debt, the unsustainable public debt, is a crisis that dates back to 1998. Our lack of foreign exchange and a management of the deficit of balance of payments date back to 2001, 2002, 2007, 2018. And one asked the question how the system that was in a deadlock since the 90s survived, maybe due to two factors. The first was the local approval, maybe aided by these clientelistic ways of governing the state after the civil war in Lebanon, but also by foreign intervention that aided the political class in Lebanon to sustain its rule. Since 2001 and Paris I conference, Paris II conference in 2002, Paris III conference in 2007, and the SAD conference in 2018, that were aid to the country without any conditions, any real conditions. The last of these was the SAD conference, in which Billions of dollars were promised, not handed yet, but promised to the state just 2 weeks before the elections, which is odd, to say the least. Until this day, if our crisis is left to be managed by the framework of this political system, that's now in its 31st birthday, that takes place, that takes the people as hostages of a power play between warlords in the name of confessionalism, our future looks quite bleak. And here I disagree a little bit with my colleague Rachel. Even elections cannot be a way out of this mix of criminality and incompetence, because under this regime and conditions, bribery is cheap and terrorizing people is easy, and it will be like asking the Egyptians or the Iraqis in the 90s to go down with Hosni Mubarak or Saddam Hussein in their next elections. Things might be a little bit more complicated. I believe after 31 years of this political system, something has to change from within in the Lebanese population's view to their ruling class, and that began in 2019 and the big demonstrations that happened, but also from without by knowing that sanctions and aid to Lebanon should be conditioned on a government, not on forming any government and not on holding any elections, because these can be used as lifelines to this political class as they did in 2001, 2, 7 and 18, but on a government leading a transitional phase from a confessional system to of mutual vetoes to a post-confessional state, a secular state, that can get the state out of the stronghold, the pseudo-feudal warlords, to turn into a center of decision-making, to be an interlocutor to the IMF, to the European Union, and to anybody in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Jad. I give now the floor to the MEPs. Je vais donner la parole à Isabelle Wissler pour le PPE en premier lieu. Isabelle.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente. Je voudrais aussi remercier nos orateurs et particulièrement Monsieur Bittard pour son franc-parler. Je vais passer à l'anglais. The situation in Lebanon is of a desperate crisis in multiple levels, and it is very important to have this conversation in Droit Committee. Allow me to raise several issues that I'm particularly concerned about. First, the education of children in Lebanon. Today it appears that the right to education is severely hampered by the economic crisis, the lack of capacity of families to respond to the fees of private schools, and the insufficient capacity of public education, as well as brain drain of teachers. How do you believe the European Parliament can further support Lebanon in this regard? Which projects or NGOs do you think are leaders in this respect on the ground? Moreover, I would like to ask if you have any information on the implementation and functioning of the Reform, Recovery and Reconstruction Framework Plan launched by the UN, EU and the World Bank last December. Is the plan at least somehow implemented? Are there any concrete results that can be identified? Concerning freedom of expression, opinion and freedom of assembly, I would like to ask you whether the situation has changed since last August. How do you see the atmosphere on the ground? What can the EU and in particular the European Parliament do to help in this situation? You talked about it, elections in Lebanon are expected to take place in 2022. How do you envisage the engagement of the society in these elections and the capacity of the political spectrum to form a stable government after the outcome of the elections? And lastly, I would like to know how you believe the EU can further support the Lebanese reforms, because without the willingness and the cooperation of the political leaders for the reforms demanded by the International Monetary Fund in order for Lebanon to receive assistance, a way out of this standstill situation is objectively impossible. So I'm interested to know what is your personal view on potential sanctions. Mr. Bittard talked about it by the EU, and who do you believe should be targeted and in which order? Furthermore, another key issue in the political standstill is the widespread issue of corruption. Therefore, I believe that investigation should be undertaken to identify those responsible for such acts, and I reiterate the importance of including acts of corruption inside the scope of the EU Magnitsky Act. Thank you so much.
Isabel Santos for the S&D.
Muito obrigada, Sra. Presidente. A sociedade libanesa está mergulhada numa profunda crise económica e social que se vem a arrastar no tempo e sem que se encontre uma solução ou que se tenha uma solução à vista. E parte desta crise advém muito do próprio sistema político, baseado numa partilha de poder pelas diferentes confissões religiosas, para a qual não se encontrou ainda uma solução. E ao ouvir estas diferentes intervenções, todas elas fundadas numa necessidade real de mudança, e a União Europeia tem vindo a pedir reformas. Aliás, em cima da mesa do Conselho está a possibilidade de aplicação de sanções. É uma discussão que está a decorrer no Conselho da União Europeia e vamos ver qual será o desfecho dessa discussão. E essa discussão surge exatamente porque não se apresentam reformas, não há mudança, e sem mudança também não pode continuar a haver apoio, porque todo o apoio acaba por desaparecer nos circuitos da corrupção. Agora, a minha grande preocupação é esta. Todos chegamos à conclusão que temos que mudar. Agora, vamos mudar como? Como é que vamos mudar? Perspectivam-se eleições. É claro, 2022 haverá eleições. Agora, a minha grande questão que coloco aos nossos convidados é esta. Está a sociedade civil e estão os movimentos políticos preparados para promover uma efetiva mudança? Há um projeto político alternativo no terreno? Porque a mudança pela mudança, por vezes, não traz mudança, traz regressão. E é bom que, quando se der o passo no Líbano, seja um passo de efetiva mudança, porque para a tragédia já basta aquela que o povo libanês está a viver.
Thank you, Isabelle. I give the floor. Je donne la parole à Salima Yembou.
Merci Marie. Je ne sais même plus par quoi commencer tellement il y a de choses à dire. Le droit des femmes, selon l'UNICEF, la pandémie du Covid pourrait entraîner le mariage de 10 millions d'enfants à travers le monde. Les lois sur le statut personnel au Liban sont patriarcales et violent de nombreux principes fondamentaux des droits de la femme et du droit des enfants. De quelle manière l'Union européenne peut-elle lutter contre ce fléau au Liban? Est-ce qu'elle a prévu d'intensifier son action d'influence et d'octroyer des moyens supplémentaires pour protéger ses enfants? Concernant la pauvreté, je crois que beaucoup de choses ont été dites. Le gouvernement intérimaire annonce travailler sur un plan de protection sociale depuis maintenant plus d'1 an. Où en sont les travaux? Est-ce que le SEAE compte demander davantage de transparence en la matière? Ensuite, je citerai le responsable de l'antenne MSF au Liban, Julien Reichmann, qui déplore le manque de données pourtant nécessaires afin d'évaluer l'ampleur de la crise sous tous ses aspects. L'Union européenne prévoit-elle d'initier des enquêtes et rapports indépendants pour pouvoir justement être en mesure d'apporter les solutions adaptées et proportionnelles à la situation? Quelle stratégie est envisagée afin de relancer la mobilisation et la solidarité internationale pour le Liban? La hausse drastique de la pauvreté attise les tensions entre les communautés ethniques et religieuses du pays, mais aussi les réfugiés qui, eux, reçoivent les aides de l'Union européenne. Que fait l'Union européenne afin de consolider bien entre les communautés? L'intervenant a dit tout à l'heure, M. Bitar a parlé de sanctions, du Liban, passant par la Libye, l'Égypte, le Congo, l'Algérie, et la liste est très longue. De nombreux citoyens, sans langue de bois, nous alertent quant au détournement des aides de l'Union européenne et demandent des sanctions. Qu'en est-il? Quand est-ce qu'on va commencer à prendre cela en compte et à sanctionner individuellement les personnes qui détournent les sommes de l'Union européenne, mais aussi de leur pays? Merci beaucoup.
Je donne la parole à Marissa Matias pour DILEFT.
Muito obrigada. Quero agradecer também aos convidados pelas apresentações. E a minha pergunta, muito concreta, já foi de certa forma colocada por duas outras colegas, mas volto a insistir nesse tema, peço desculpa, que é a questão das sanções. Sabemos bem como a situação no Líbano se encontra a população perante muitas dificuldades e uma situação que se agravou muito nos últimos tempos e estamos ao corrente, temos conhecimento dessas dificuldades e, paralelamente, tem evoluído a discussão sobre as sanções. Em primeiro lugar, gostava de saber a vossa opinião, ou seja, se houver uma decisão favorável por parte do Conselho, como é que veem essa possibilidade de aplicação de sanções? E, em segundo lugar, gostava de saber também a vossa opinião sobre o quão eficazes podem ser ou não sanções no sentido de ajudar a sociedade libanesa a encontrar um rumo, porque obviamente terá que ser a sociedade libanesa a encontrar esse rumo. E tendo em conta todas as limitações que nós conhecemos do país e da própria organização do sistema político, das dificuldades de inclusão de vários grupos, nomeadamente a questão do direito das mulheres, que também já foi referida, como é que veem essas consequências ou possíveis consequências das sanções? E, por fim, gostava que pudessem desenvolver um bocadinho mais como têm visto a questão dos refugiados, sendo que o Líbano é um país que acolhe tantos refugiados, como é que estão a evoluir as tensões que já vinham sido detectadas há bastante tempo, como estão a evoluir essas tensões na própria sociedade libanesa e de que forma é que veem o futuro em relação à situação dos refugiados no país. Muito obrigada.
Thank you. I give the floor to Dietmar Köster for SND.
Thank you, Maria, and thanks all the experts for their really valuable presentations. As one of the most indebted states in the world, Lebanon is in the midst of the worst socio-economic and democratic crisis since the end of the civil war in 1990. The corrupt political and economic government in Lebanon, which is influenced mainly by the terrorist organization Hezbollah and which is supported by the Iranian regime, is mainly responsible for this. Their failure to manage the impact of the pandemic and their accountability for the explosion at the port of Beirut last August has dramatically deteriorated the circumstances of the ordinary people. And as the expert has mentioned, more than 55% of the populations now live below the poverty line. This is especially true for Syrian refugees, who are among the most vulnerable groups in the country and who are completely without any rights. The blast also had an overwhelmingly negative impact on the LGBTIQ community in terms of resources and safe area. Could you please explain a bit on these issues? The Hezbollah, a state within a state, ruled with mafia-like structures despotically. The assassination of the cultural and political activist Lokman Slim in February 2021 was a crime and an assault on all democratic activists. Economic aid from the European Union is urgently needed, but it must be linked to human rights standards, and it must be ensured that the money won't end in the pockets of the corrupt elites. Are there any initiatives to disarm the militia groups, especially Hezbollah, and what do you think, which role will the Iranian regime play for the future of the Lebanon? Thanks.
Thank you. Jordi Solé for the Greens.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks to our guests for their very valuable contributions. It's really painful to see how the situation in Lebanon is deteriorating from nearly every point of view, politically, socially, financially, humanitarian situation. Last week, the interim Prime Minister told in a meeting with foreign ambassadors that Lebanon is, and I quote, days away from a social explosion. I would like to know from our guests whether they share this very pessimistic and even alarming view. I would like also to know from them what is the social situation in terms of unrest, in Lebanon. We know that in March there were large demonstrations in Tripoli. They were met with police violence and allegations even of disappearances and allegedly even torture. So I would like to know what is the situation in the country when it comes to mobilization and social unrest. And finally, I share with you the views that change in Lebanon has to come mainly from within Lebanon, from Lebanese civil society, but somehow it should be also incentivized from the international community. Now, my question is, to what extent do you believe it is possible for Lebanese democracy to start anew, to have a new beginning, going beyond this sectarian, confessional, corrupt system of government, seeing how deeply entrenched in the institutions and in the governments of the country this system is nowadays. Thank you.
Thank you. Je vais donner la parole 1 minute à chaque intervenant pour répondre aux questions qui ont été formulées. Et donc je commencerai par Karim Bitar. Vous avez 1 minute. Beaucoup de questions ont été posées, mais voilà, prenez un peu les priorités en fonction de ce qui a été demandé. Vous avez 1 minute.
Mr. Bitar, you have to push the speak button, please. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Madam President. Thanks to all honourable members of the Parliament for their very interesting questions. I will start by addressing the question that was asked towards the end. Is Lebanon days away from a social explosion? Well, I'm afraid the answer is perhaps. We might be weeks or months at the latest, at the most, away from a social explosion, because as you know, this combination of deep recession, hyperinflation, and continued devaluation creates an explosive cocktail. The GDP has contracted cumulatively by 40% year on year since mid-2019. All political scientists know that in world history there is no example when you have such a wide economic crisis, such a huge contraction in GDP that is not very rapidly followed by social unrest, by insecurity, by clashes. So yes, it is absolutely an emergency. We no longer have the time to send fact-finding missions. We have all the facts. We know what should be done. We could very well start by freezing the ill-begotten assets of the ruling kleptocracy. They are very well known to every European diplomat in Beirut. The time has come to sanction them because, and I will try to respond to the other questions, there was a question about NGOs. NGOs are playing a fundamental role in Lebanon today. They are helping the population deal with this insufferable crisis. However, we cannot rely exclusively on NGOs. NGOs are often used for patronage and clientelism, and also this phenomena called the NGOization of a society is dangerous. Lebanon needs first and foremost to strengthen the state institutions, to strengthen the central authorities. Many European members of parliament focus on Hezbollah. And I think what we could say was well written last week by a report that was published by Chatham House, the leading British think tank, the Royal Institute of International Affairs. And if you allow me to quote, they say, while Hezbollah is a contributing factor to the weakness of the Lebanese state, it is also a product of the political system. And as long as the current political system in Lebanon continues to exist, it will not be possible to reverse Hezbollah's sway over the state. So what I'm trying to say is that the priority should be to prevent state institutions from crumbling. Hezbollah and all other Lebanese non-state actors, all other factions, benefit from the fact that our central state has been historically very weak. The only way to diminish the rising influence of Hezbollah is to strengthen the Lebanese army, the Lebanese security forces, to allow the Lebanese army to get access to all sorts of weaponry so that it can protect the territorial integrity of Lebanon without any non-state actor trying to take its role. There was also an interesting question about freedom of expression, and this is also something very sad because Lebanon was historically an oasis of free speech in a region ruled by authoritarian regimes. And unfortunately, for the past couple of years, and specifically in the past 6 months, we have witnessed more than 60 arbitrary arrests of journalists and political activists, according to Amnesty International. Very often, a so-called cyber criminality bureau tries to summon bloggers who have written an offensive post or an offensive tweet, and every single Lebanese freedom of conscience, freedom of speech is jeopardized by the ruling kleptocracy. The political system, yes.
Désolé, Monsieur Bittard, je vais devoir vous couper parce qu'on a un autre débat ensuite et donc j'aimerais quand même donner la parole à un des journalistes. Et comme je suis une femme, je donnerai la parole à une femme. Et donc je donne la parole à Rachel Karam en priorité. Voilà, Rachel, vous avez la parole.
Ms. Karam, you have to push the speak button. Thank you.
Ah, sorry. Je croyais que j'ai déjà touché. Merci, madame, mais je préfère donner la parole à Jad parce que Jad, c'est un collègue économique. Il sait très bien la situation économique et il pourrait...
D'accord.
Il pourrait répondre aux questions. Il pourrait répondre aux questions.
Si vous autorisez Jad de donner la parole. Super. Jad, grâce à une femme, vous avez la parole.
And that's a privilege. Thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Mr. Speaker. I won't take long. I will agree with all of what Mr. Karim Bitar said. And from the systemic crisis that he mentioned at the end of his little talk, I will say that answering one of the questions about what's the solution in relation to the sanctions, that the sanctions that were applied to specific politicians in Lebanon, it didn't quite make a big change in the political scene in Lebanon, and was and is being used to legitimize some nationalistic feelings to reinvigorate the appeal of these politicians. Maybe the sanctions that, and that's what I was trying to say in my little speech also, that the sanctions should be conditioned on a better democratic features in Lebanon. We have to mention that Lebanon is now a non-constitutional state, because in our constitution in Lebanon, in the Article 95, it states that the confessional power sharing system is a transitional system to be changed, and it stipulates...
Okay, sorry, we lost Jad, so I give the floor to the External Action Service for 1 minute. Daniel Aristiti.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's indeed a pleasure and an honor to be here today.
Aristiti.
Lebanon is facing interlinked crisis, political, financial, economic and social, exacerbated by the explosion at the port of Beirut on the 4th of August and the COVID-19 pandemic. 55% of the Lebanese population live in poverty, as well as 90% of Syrian refugees, and unemployment stands at 40%. The country has been led by a caretaker government for almost a year now, with no real progress on the necessary economic and governance reforms. The compounded crisis have negatively affected the realization of economic and social rights of large segments of the population. HRVP Borrell visited Beirut on the 19th and the 20th of June and met with Lebanese leaders as well as with representatives of civil society. The HRVP highlighted the need for the Lebanese leadership to form a government soonest that is able to implement the necessary reforms, and indeed positive as well as negative measures are being considered. The situation in Lebanon is being discussed today at the Foreign Affairs Council. Human rights are at the core of our relations with Lebanon. The partnership priorities state that the respect of democratic principles and fundamental human rights constitutes an essential element of the relations between the EU and Lebanon. The Council conclusions on Lebanon on the 7th of December of 2020 underscore the need for the reform process to ensure that human rights and fundamental freedoms are respected. The EU continuously advocates for human rights in the political and policy dialogue with the Lebanese authorities, and this is also done by carrying out numerous activities and public outreach events. The EU delegation in Beirut organizes regular EU human rights focal points meetings with EU member states in areas such as freedom of opinion and expression, freedom of assembly, or torture prevention. In 2020, 19 projects related to human rights and worth around 27 million euro were implemented by CSOs and UN agencies. Overall, in 2020, the EU provided in excess of 300 million euro in assistance to Lebanon. As we approach the one-year anniversary of the tragic explosion at the Beirut harbor on the 4th of August of 2020, the EU has regularly called on the Lebanese authorities to deliver on an impartial, credible, transparent, and independent investigation, notably under Item 2 at the Human Rights Council in September last year and again in June 2021. To conclude, Lebanon needs to form a government immediately and implement key governance and economic reforms. The European Parliament may wish to consider engaging with the Lebanese Parliament to help ensure that the legal aspect of the reform process is performed swiftly and effectively. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup. Ceci clôture notre débat sur le Liban.